I have been working through the Gospel of Matthew, doing an exposition of the Gospel. I have been doing it in English, but what I'd like to do on this video is read it in the Greek, translate it into English, and then have comments or commentary. So we are at verse 33. We're at verse 38, where we'll be looking at the teaching on non-resistance, followed by the teaching of loving enemies. So it reads, Akusate hate erethe, ophthalmon anti ophthalmu, kai adanta anti adantas. You have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This comes out of the Torah, out of Exodus 21, 24, also Leviticus 24, 20, and Deuteronomy 19, verse 21. So, and I think what this is looking at is something like was sort of a retaliation, but looking at absolute justice, something like that. But I say to you, ego delego humen me antistenai to phanero, al hostese rapidze, estain dexion, siagana su, strepson auto kaitain alain. But I say to you, do not resist the evil one, but whosoever is smiting you on your right cheek, turn to him also the other. I think he's looking at a clear teaching here of non-resistance. And the idea is slapping one on the cheek would be shaming one in a public way, it seems to me. And so whosoever does that, like with the backhand, they might do something like that. Whoever does that, I say to you, don't resist. Whoever smites you on the cheek, turn to him the other also. So he's teaching the principle of non-resistance, non-retaliatory. In one of our churches one time, a lady said, nobody's going to walk over me. If they do anything that I don't like, they're going to hear about it. And so often in church meetings, this is what happens. Having been a pastor for a number of years, that people in board meetings often don't turn to the other cheek. They get angry, they'll argue, they'll shout at one another. And Jesus is teaching, I believe here, a beautiful principle of non-resistance. And then we move on, verse 40, Kaito thelanti soi krithenai, kaitan kitona su labain, aphes auto kaita hemation. That is, and to the one who desires to be in court with you and to take away your ketone, give to him also your hemation. So in other words, one who wants to take away like your inner garment, give to him the outer one, which was one which one would sleep in. And to be warm, it would seem. So I think what he's saying is, again, as you're going to court, if this happens, don't retaliate, but do the opposite. And then, kai hostise agaruse million hen hupage met out to duo. That is, whosoever is compelling you to go 1 mile, go with him too. Often, like the carrying of the cross of Jesus, there was that compelling of the one to carry the cross. If you're compelled to go 1 mile by, let's say, a Roman official, go with him too. He's using that as an analogy, I think, against non-retaliation. And then, to hai, to the one who asks you, to aitutise das, kaitan delanta apa su danisastai me apostrophes. To the one who is asking you, give. And to the one who is desiring to borrow from you, do not turn away. And I think we're looking at a need here, not borrowing things that would hurt the other person, but where you can actually be of help, to reach out and help someone. So I think the thought here is against retaliation. That would be the summary of what I see going on in this paragraph. Then he moves on to talk about love for one's enemies. Ekusa te chaterethe, agapeses tan plesiansu, kai miseses tan etransu. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. This is a quote from Leviticus 19, verse 18. You shall love your neighbor. It's a clear teaching from the Torah, but hate your enemy. Now, I think hate here is not hating in the sense of just absolute hating, but I think it means you treat him in a much lesser helpful way. Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. I don't think that meant that God hated Esau, but he favored Jacob in that Malachi context. I think it's the same idea here. I don't think they had heard that you hate your enemy, but you don't treat your enemy in the same kind of positive way that you would treat a neighbor. But Jesus says, ego delego humen, agapatetus ectrus hemon, kai prasiucheste huperton diokanton humas. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray on behalf of those who are persecuting you. I don't think he's saying you have an emotional love for people that are being hurtful to you, but you are to love them by praying for them. And so often, even in families, people can say, I'm never going to speak to that person again. Or even in church life, we can have this kind of response when people are, let's say, very hurtful in their verbal attack of someone. Instead of praying for them, one attacks back with words, with another verbal attack in return. So I'm seeing this more as what Jesus is teaching, that we're not to not only not retaliate, but even pray for those who maybe say hurtful things about us. I'm using that as an example. Hapos geneste huioi tu patras humon tu in uranois hate tan helion autu anatele epi panerus kai agathus kai breke epi dikaius kai adicus. Thus you will become sons of your Father who is in heaven, because he is causing the sun to arise upon the evil and upon the good, and he is causing rain upon the righteous and the unrighteous. In other words, if you want to be like your Father in heaven, he treats everyone with the sun. everyone with the rain, even upon the righteous and the unrighteous. So Jesus is saying, if you want to look like that, then be that way in the way that you respond to people. And then he goes on to say, Angar agape tetus agapontas humas tena mistan eketer uhi kai hoi telonai ta alta poi usin. For if you love the ones that love you, what reward are you having? Do not even also the tax collectors do the same? Now, the tax collectors were uh, not liked by many of the Jewish people because they were collecting taxes for Rome and dipping in and enriching themselves by what they were doing. So, in other words, they were not a group that people really liked. And what Jesus is saying, I believe, for if you love those that love you, and you show a reception, a kindness to them, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And that would be true today. Do not even people who don't even claim Christ love those that love them? And so he's trying to encourage the followers of Christ. What reward have you if you're no different than the world? And then in verse 47, he continues, Kai an espaseste tus adelphus humon manon te perusan poiete uchi kai hoi ethnikoi ta alta poiusin. That is, and if you greet your brethren only, what more are you doing? Do not even the heathen do the same? So, in other words, if you're simply being kind and greeting those that are your brethren only, that like you, and you're not doing that to those that maybe don't verbally treat you the same way or respond to you the same way, then how are you any different than the heathen? And applying it to today, how are you any different than non-believers? Because they respond well to those they like. And one of the challenges of following the teaching of Christ is it's difficult to respond in a loving way, at least being kind to people that can be hurtful and maybe even very rude and so forth. And so I think this is what he's talking about. He's introducing an ethic that's very hard to live. And this is what Jesus wants his followers to do. And so he concludes, Esiste un homes teleoi hos pater homon ha uraneas teleas estin. Be therefore perfect as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. And I think here, the word perfect, we could say mature in the way, perfect or complete maybe, in the way that you treat everybody as your Father in heaven is perfect. In other words, he sends the rain on all people, the good and the bad. He sends the, can I say, sunshine on both. So I think that's what he's saying. So you be complete and do the same in your relationship with others, even being kind to those who are not always maybe openly kind to you. I'll never forget when I was in junior high school, we had these neighborhood basketball games, and we would invite people from the other side of town to come and play basketball. And on this particular team, there was a person that always wanted to start a fight with me. And I said to my mother, what do I do? I don't want to, she said, I tell you what, invite them for a basketball game. And we had a basketball hoop in our backyard. And after the game, we'll have chili supper for them. And I said, Mother, these people aren't very nice. I mean, they're hurtful. They are rude. They don't like me. And she said, well, let's do that anyway. So we did. My mother fixed chili supper, and after the game, they came in for chili supper. It was amazing what happened. Tom became this particular individual a very close and kind person after that. And years later, my mother was shopping at the grocery store, and a young man came up. I was in college at the time, and he said, "Do you remember me?" And she said, "Well, I'm not sure." He said, "Well, I was the boy that was over at your house for chili supper many, many years ago, and I never forgot that." Uh, so at that time, my mother was teaching me the very thing that Jesus is talking about here. And that's what I think all believers following Jesus Christ are to seek to do, to be mature and complete in their relationship to all people they come in contact with. Some will not be that nice and maybe will say things that can be hurtful, but try to treat them in the same way as you would those that are very, friendly and nice to you and would say nice things. I think that's what Jesus is teaching. So the whole principle of non-resistance, which I think is a beautiful principle that can be applied to all areas of life.